you ready?
Yes.
All right. Action.
Good morning, Victor Senior High School. My name is Tristen Bernhardt with the Victor Voice. Today is Friday, November 1st, and it's an A Day. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the election is coming up next week. In light of that, we wanted to create an episode exploring your thoughts on the election process as a whole. Last week, we conducted a poll asking for your input and opinions on several topics regarding the election. I'm here with Mr. Hunkovic, AP Government Teacher, Mr. Musc, Sociology and Government Teacher, and Mr. Purdie, AP US History Teacher, to go through the results of the poll. We plan to discuss some of the questions that you asked. Hello, and thank you for sitting down with me. Before we jump in, our poll was based on the New York Times poll of teenagers, and we received just shy of 400 responses. You have had some time to look through the findings of our poll. Can you each give us one stat or result that stood out to you?
So I would start by how much do you think the outcome of the election will impact me or my family? There were a ton of kids that had neutral and then some disagrees. So I would just beg the kids, the elections will impact you. And I would say especially the younger you are, right, you're going to live through a longer time period of any policy changes that happen. So they're going to impact you, and if you're watching this and you're in high school, they're going to impact you for a long time. So you want to be engaged and participatory.
I'll just add that in looking at the results, it was interesting to see that social issues primarily were at the top of the list in terms of students saying that they thought that they were going to be very important in their lives. And as I recall, economic issues were just over 50%. I think that in social studies classes, we always talk about the categories of political, social, and economic, and the fact that they're all interconnected. Every single one of these issues is going to be an economic issue, especially when we look at how our future government is going to spend their money.
The thing that stood out to me is New York is often seen as a solidly blue state, being that classically the state and its electoral votes have gone towards Democrats. Yet, I think it's an unfair representation of the state as a whole. We have pockets of blueness, but we have a wide swath of Republican, both traditional and new Republican voters. And our poll shows that almost 60% of students here at Victor High School would vote Trump, even though we are traditionally a blue state. So maybe our state demographics are changing.
Multiple students asked why you should care about the election. Mr. Purdie, why should students care?
So yeah, I talked about it a little bit, but just that the election will impact anyone, but I think when you're a kid, you're a little bit less engaged, but you have older people making decisions for younger people that are going to last a really long time. So a really boring issue, it's hard to get my kids to focus on, Social Security, right? It has impending insolvency problems. They're going to have to make some big adjustments, right, to keep that going. So you have current old people are going to change policy, and then young people are going to work under it and pay into it, for 80 years. So the people who really should be most engaged on the changes would be kids that are just about to start working. So that's just one example, but I mean, you could make that same case for any policy change.
Oh, to add to that, the right now the current Congress is, I believe, average age about 66, and they're making policies based upon social media, artificial intelligence, things that really they probably have very little experience with, but is a way of life for you. It's kind of like me trying to explain to my grandparents how to program a VCR. And they're making policy on it.
I have the pleasure of working with AP Gov students and law students who really dive into the issues, and whether we're doing current events in AP Gov or whether we're doing law, where students get the opportunity to really dive into public policy issues for an entire school year. With a lot of juniors and seniors, we really get the opportunity to see how is this going to impact you not just in the next 15 years, but in the next 2 to 3 years, when we look at student loan debt, when we look at the safety of your community, when we look at what's going to be happening with our national debt, where our money is going. And I think that if we can see the big picture and we can look a short period down the line, when you do the research, there is no issue here that isn't going to impact you, even if it's something that appears to be far away, such as a conflict in the Middle East or even something on our southern border.
Electoral college popped up in many of the questions submitted. Mr. Hunkovic, why do we still use the electoral system as opposed to the popular vote?
Well, the short answer is it's because it's in the Constitution, and without a constitutional amendment, we're going to continue to use the Electoral College because that's what the Founding Fathers put in place. One of the things we talk about in U.S. history and AP Gov is the notion of tyranny of the majority. The Founding Fathers wanted to make sure that they had an insurance policy or a safeguard in place with regards to the popular vote, which is why you can have a situation, which we've had 5 times in our nation's history, where the Electoral College vote does not align with the popular vote. But more so, I think it's important for people to understand there's been a lot of discussion in the news about swing states and how they will ultimately decide the 2024 election. But if you've paid attention in your history class, you know that the way the Electoral College works is within our 50 states, when elections take place within individual states, whoever gets the most amount of votes in that state will get all of the Electoral College points. So if you're in one of your history classes and you see that Electoral College map, you'll know that somebody like California that has a population of 39 million people, they have 55 Electoral College votes. And if history repeats itself, when Harris wins California, she will get all 55 of those votes. Whereas Texas has about 30 million people, you're looking at a state that traditionally falls to the Republicans. The popular vote in that state will tip towards all 30 of those votes going towards Trump in the 2024 election. So, and this is very interesting because, like Mr. Muscarella said, when you take a deeper look into individual states, you know that New York has pockets of blue and pockets of red, but at the end of the day, we call it a winner-take-all system because all you need is the majority of the votes in those states, and you get all those points.
So a couple of things to add on the Electoral College. I say to my kids, it helps the concept of federalism. The state itself, its unique composition, its economy, culture, people, geography, factor into the election through the Electoral College. If you make a change in federal policy that's positive or negative to the state as a whole, that's going to move a few votes, right? Centrist people, that, the movables, the independents, but then that candidate will gain or lose the entire state. So you have to be mindful or respectful of that. So in New York, it might be, upstate dairy farms. It might be the Finger Lakes wine region. It might be New York City tourism. If you make a policy that's, a detriment to one of those things, right, you might lose the entire state. So the state itself is protected, or I say to my kids, the state itself gets to vote under the electoral system.
Thank you. Mr. Muscarella, our student body gets its information from a wide variety of sources. How would you recommend students learn about politics? And how do they keep from feeling out of touch, being overwhelmed, or tricked by false information?
No. By taking in a wide variety of sources. It can be very dangerous when you place yourself in a position where either algorithms are dictating the thing that you see, or you've placed yourself in an information bubble where all I take in is the news network that my parents happen to listen to, or the news that my grandmother plays while I'm riding in the car, like that kind of thing. It's really important to diversify where you get your news, not just domestically, but also internationally. So one of the things that I ask my students to do is to, if they insist upon gathering news from social media, to subscribe to a number of different news organizations. Subscribe to the one that your family takes news in from. Great. Also, find something that swings in a different direction. In the United States, it's really hard to find something that is remarkably unbiased, but we can look overseas for some additional perspectives. gathering our news is a lot like gathering our self-esteem to a certain extent. It's really important that we're getting a complete picture, or as complete a picture as we can. So, take in your news from MSNBC or Fox, sure, but then bolster that with Reuters, AP, the BBC. Al Jazeera has a fantastic perspective on us that is completely different than what we would receive here. And understand where these news sources are getting their funding, where they're getting, what biases they have. I think the last thing that I would say is if the news is sexy or has some kind of like elaborate graphic and packaging, I personally tend to trust it less because I feel like I'm being sold something. So look for a variety of sources of news, and then don't be afraid to talk about it so that you have human voices that are in your lives, your teachers, your friends, your coaches, your parents, your grandparents, who are speaking into that as well.
Thank you. To all of you, it's fair to say you all think it's important for students to learn about the system of democracy, but many students and teachers feel it's inappropriate or unacceptable to discuss politics in the classroom. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I don't think it's inappropriate to talk about. I think you need to be careful on how you're doing it. As a student, I would ask, right, if you feel that your teacher needs help, right, being professional, pick an issue that you want to know more about and say, you know, how do prominent Democrats feel about this issue, or what's their opinion on this issue, and how do prominent Republicans feel, right? So you need to ask, I'm looking for both sides. Why would someone vote for this? And the people who are voting against it, why are they going to vote against it? So it also kind of protects you maybe as a student. You might not want to give up your own political leanings either. You're just saying, I'm interested in this issue. Why would someone support it? Why would someone oppose it? And I, as a teacher, I try to do that as well. It's never it's, the people who support this bill have said these 2 or 3 reasons why, and the people who oppose it say these two or three reasons why. And I think that's a good way to kind of keep things impersonal, especially when, you might not know or have the rapport with the person where you're like really ready to go into a back and forth debate with them. Or you might say, look, to keep it civil, right, I'm intentionally, discussing it in an impersonal way.
Yeah, great perspective. And I'll just add to that. I think that continuing on what Mr. Musc said about the way that people are consuming media, not only is it important to get all sides of an issue, which can be incredibly difficult and time consuming, but based on this data, it's very clear that our students are getting the majority of their political information from social media. And if you consider what social media is and the limitations of social media, sometimes in terms of the limitation in words that can be posted, it's incredibly curated. And as a result, you're not going to get the full picture. So I think that's where teachers have a huge responsibility in terms of having those conversations in the classroom, because what we can do is we can dive a little bit deeper. We can have a more long-form conversation, and we can kind of fight against some of the gatekeeping and some of the agenda setting that's being set by these media sites that, as Mr. Musc said, are oftentimes being paid to portray stories a certain way. Finally, I think that teachers have an incredible responsibility in terms of having these political conversations to be neutral in the way that we portray our political ideas. Like it or not, teachers are in a tremendous position of power over their students. And if we want students to have the courage to have these conversations, which might not be popular conversations, but to look at both sides, I think that teachers must make sure that they remain neutral and they let the students have the voice. And we ourselves as teacher don't set certain agendas or gatekeep certain information because of our political leanings.
That's so important. I could not concur more with Mr. Hunkovic. Where I actually deviate slightly is only in the openness of sharing. For the most part, the classroom has to be a safe place to discuss all issues. It has to be a safe place where students from a variety of perspectives can engage in civil discourse and we, like Mr. Hunkovic was saying, have to model that openness and discourse. When I first started teaching, I really hid my political leanings, and then I found out that I'm really bad at it. And it started to creep into dishonesty. So what I try and do is I make a point of demonstrating more of an ethic than trying to shield them from me. I more say, you're probably going to figure out like how I would vote or where I sit on an issue. So let's look at some opposing viewpoints. Let's make sure that we're engaging in the intellectual exercise of challenging our own thoughts. And so I do tend to share if students ask, just like I would share, other aspects of my personhood. I think it creates an open environment, one that allows students a little bit more time or a little bit more comfort. But that doesn't mean it's right. I mean, Mr. Hunkovic is making a great point about the influence teachers have.
Thank you. Mr. Purdie, can you put this election into historical context, perhaps in how divided we are, in the many moments or the tightness of the polls?
So yeah, and I might then tie in a couple of these things. First of all, I would say there's been the partisan divide has ebbed and flowed and been, wild like it is today, previously. So I think everyone's living through the current moment, and it seems like a lot, and it is, right, the divisiveness. But we've been there before. The election of 1800 would be, a big example. A big advice that I would want to give to students is, if you can distance yourself far enough, and that's what's great about history, you can really clearly see that both parties are making positive contributions through time. So I'm trying to get my kids, no one is the enemy, right? And there isn't the evil side and the good side. So just to give you an example, now if you go old enough back, it's boring enough where no one's impassioned. The Federalist Party gave you the Constitution, right? Whether you're Democrat or Republican today, you're probably like, and that's a wonderful thing. Their arch nemesis party, right, the Anti-Federalists and then the Democratic Republicans, gave us the Bill of Rights. Also super wonderful. So, to go back and be like, which party was correct, or who are the good guys or the bad guys? I'm saying try to reject that. It's like we as a country are stumbling forward, making mistakes along the way, right? But trying to move forward, for the progress and maintenance of our country, standard of living, and our ability to do good in the world. And the two-party system is constantly making positive contributions from both sides. When you look back at a U.S. history textbook or you listen to a U.S. history teacher, they're never like, oh yes, this party from the early 20s that was super evil and terrible, right? It's like, yeah, they had difference of opinions. A few things from this party survived and went forward, and a few things from this party survived and went forward. And then there's a bunch of things that get shed over time, right? And that's the system working. But you can't get caught up in the moment of yes, things are nasty and everybody's playing to win because they think their idea is correct. But 50 years from now, it's going to be, hey, both parties advanced some good ideas. So just try to keep that in mind, I guess.
Thank you. Political violence is a reality, and the rhetoric on both sides is intense. Mr. Muscarella, how worried are you about the potential for violence?
Worried. I don't tend to worry much, but I'm keenly aware and concerned. The United States has, as Mr. Purdie said, a long history of impassioned conversations. And just doing a little prep here, the AP and Reuters both did excellent articles in the last 7 weeks about the history of American political violence. We're not shy to express our opinions that way. But in the era of social media, where people have become so siloed and so distanced personally, yet feeling like we're part of this clan online, it seems as though we have shed some of the guardrails that have protected us in the past from ongoing political violence. and some of the norms and civic behavior that have held us together don't seem to be as present. So I'm aware that this is going to be messy, and we probably won't know who the president is until the 21st of January, if we're lucky.
Thank you. Mr. Hunkovic, we have a tough one for you. What do the candidates have in common?
Whew. Both American citizens. It's a great question, because I think that, kind of connecting back to what Mr. Muscarella and Mr. Purdie said, there is a lot of noise, and there's a lot of people that want to pit either side as the enemy as a result of repeating sound bites that they've heard from somebody else, or because the media oftentimes is being paid to further that divide. But one of my favorite things about teaching AP government is we actually take a political spectrum test, but it's a long form test where they have to answer about 80 questions, and we get plotted on a political spectrum, not just left to right, but top to bottom, with looking at things like how authoritative are you, how hands-off or libertarian are you. And when we look at those results, we notice that historically, over the course of the last 9 years, all my AP government students are closer to the center moderate line than anything else. And there's certainly outliers, but that's a great exercise to show that people have more in common than they actually think. There are always going to be those hot button issues, such as a woman's right to choose, the border, what's going on in the Middle East. But at the end of the day, when you look at the vast majority of things that our government has to do in terms of balancing the budget, in terms of taking care of our infrastructure, in terms of keeping us safe through a rule of law that's actually going to make it so that Americans have a lower homicide rate and more safety for people just walking on the street in comparison to other nations, both political parties, when they get into positions of power, they have to continue to keep America the country that it is, where people have those freedoms, but they also have the safety and protection as citizens living in our country. So,
These last few are for everyone. This poll and this discussion was focused on the presidential election, but the House, Senate, and local elections matter too. What will you each be watching for on election night?
On election night, I usually bounce back and forth between 3 different networks. I try and go to PBS, Fox, and MSNBC and simply watch how they're reporting the results, when they report the results, how they describe the results. As far as Senate, House, and local elections go, New York has 1 senator that's up for election. And sadly, it's probably a non-competitive race. So honestly, I don't even know that I'll pay attention to it.
Yeah, I would say election night, the Senate is the easiest, to watch. There's fewer of them, and then same thing. A lot of the states are not going to be contested, so you can watch your swing state races that have a senator up for a vote, and the key House races. You could certainly search a list of them to pay attention to, but the Senate's a little bit easier to watch. You're watching senators who are up for election in swing states.
Swing states for sure. I think that, when you're going to have to stay up all night to try to figure out who actually wins the states initially, and then after that, irrespective of who is declared the winner, I think that there's been a tradition the last few general elections of claiming that the election was in some way fraudulent. So I think that the entertainment will continue after election night as we look at all the various lawsuits and judicial challenges to the validity of the election.
How could the outcome of the election affect the school and our students?
I certainly think with the Department of Education has been discussed or debated by parties. So there's on the Republican side, I would say the Department of Education itself hasn't been super maybe well thought of. A lot of candidates on the right are advocates of school choice or a voucher system, and then you have the opposite opinions on the other side. So not trying to say any of that would be good or bad, but that that represents a big change or a big difference.
I think that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to politics because they don't do their research. I think that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the Victor community because they don't do their research. There's an assumption when I meet people and I tell them that I work at Victor that, oh my gosh, that school with all those rich kids. That's not always the case. We have a very diverse community here at Victor. So kind of circling back to my initial reactions to this survey and the lack of concern of the economic issues, what happens in our Congress over the next couple of years, and razor-thin margins control the majorities in both the House and Senate right now, is going to greatly impact what's going to happen with our budget and what's going to happen to a number of issues that's going to continue to impact the families around here, especially as we try to survive this recession.
And I think the most immediate impact that students are going to feel is the reaction of their parents, reaction of the grown-ups around them. Oftentimes high schoolers will say, not my circus, not my monkeys, I can't vote right now, so I don't really care. But their whole community is going to be reacting, and they're going to be seeing in real time how the grown-ups around them choose their words, choose their actions, choose how to express those things. And those are developmental sociological examples that the kids are going to be socialized through this. And that's, I think, the immediate impact.
Although we didn't ask students who they would vote for, we did ask who they thought the school would elect. Around 60% thought former President Trump would be elected. Do you think that this actually reflects the student body, or is it merely a perception of itself?
I would say we're in a town and in districts that lean right. If you just measured our, the towns or our congressional district, that makes sense to me. That our local area would vote for Trump. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it wasn't surprising for me. I have fun. I always show the map and I tell my students, you live in a red district in terms of your congressional representative, and I live in a blue district in terms of my congressional representative because I live in the city of Rochester, and the students here live right on the edge of Ontario County. So, not surprising. But at the end of the day, I don't think either side is confident that they're going to win. This is going to be a tight election.
To all of you, it feels like we're stuck in a never-ending campaign in a divided country. To end on a high note, what still gives you hope?
Perspective of history that, you have this feeling that each election is, going to make or break the country and it's impending doom, or possibly we save ourselves last minute. But, we've been rolling for a long time. Both parties have made positive contributions. The founders and the Constitution is intentionally complex to, prevent one side or the other from running away with their with power and their will. So there's a lot to to couch or to moderate anything, and the experiment will roll on.
I'm incredibly hopeful. I think that when you take a step back and you look at what it's like to live in the United States right now in comparison to 50 years ago, 100 years ago, not that people don't have individual problems, but we're all lucky to be American citizens because of the protections that exist in this country under the Constitution. I think when you look at how people get their information, which is biased media, they like to portray a lot of the negative things because news has kind of become a blend of, information and almost reality TV, and it pays to perpetuate the fistfights outside of rallies. But additionally, if you look at how less and less people are buying into mainstream media and less people are watching cable news and more people are buying into long-form conversations, podcasts, and even conversations like this, I've seen a little bit of a shift in terms of the way people look at this, and they're more willing to have a conversation because I think a lot of people are pretty drained from the negativity of politics.
I think the thing that gives me hope is looking at the question, how do you get your information about the election, and noticing that the three of the highest ticking sources are family members, class discussions, and friends, that we're getting offline, not to be technophobe, but we're getting offline and we're actually having one-on-one, we're having small group conversations. It's really easy to paint an opposing viewpoint as the other. But when I'm having a conversation with you about your lived experience as an American, and you're having one with me, it's very hard to demonize when we're face to face. You know, we're not issues, we're people. And if politics is the governing of the city, then why not, you know, these face to face conversations are where it's at.
Thank you all, and although it may be impossible, try to get some sleep on Tuesday.
Thanks for having us.
Yo,
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you to all of you who participated in the survey, and a special thank you to Mr. Dunrow and Mrs. Schluter for giving feedback on this process. We at the Victor Voice hope this helped and encourage you to pay attention to politics because it affects our lives, and your voice should be heard, your vote should be counted, and your opinion should matter. This has been Tristen Bernhardt with the Victor Voice signing off.